marked by the Hollow King. Sylvain Corbin had always been warned never to enter the ruins beyond the river, the ones where the last blood oath had been sworn. But the moment she crossed the threshold, the air thickened, the wind whispering in a language she did not know but somehow understood. The torches flared to life. The earth trembled beneath her feet. And then, from the darkness, a voice low, rich, edged with something ancient. "You broke the pact," he murmured, stepping forward, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "Now you belong to me." Chapter 1. The Whispers of the Riverbend. The late afternoon sun cast long, skeletal shadows from the ancient oaks that lined the whispering river. Sylvain Corbin, her silver hair braided loosely down her back, paused at the water's edge, the familiar scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling her nostrils. 58 years she had lived in Oakhaven. 58 years she had been warned away from the ruins that lay just across the river, shrouded in mist and whispered warnings. They were a part of her childhood, a constant, looming presence, both terrifying and strangely alluring. Her fingers traced the worn silver locket at her throat, a gift from her grandmother, Alara. Inside, a miniature portrait of a woman with eyes the same startling shade of violet as Sylvain's own stared back at her. "Never cross the river, Sylvain," Alara had warned, her voice raspy with age and something else fear. "The ruins, they hold a darkness. A broken oath. A curse." Sylvain had dismissed it as an old woman's tale, the folklore of a town steeped in secrets. After Alara passed, the locket was all Sylvain had left, a tangible link to a past she barely understood. But today, the whispers from the river seemed louder, more insistent. The air itself felt charged, thrumming with an unseen energy. Her heart, usually a steady, predictable rhythm, fluttered like a trapped bird. She had come to the riverbank seeking solace, as she often did. The quiet murmur of the water, the rustling leaves, they usually calmed the persistent ache in her heart, the emptiness left by her husband, Thomas, who had passed away 5 years prior. Theirs had been a quiet love, a comfortable companionship built on shared routines and gentle affection. But even in his arms, a part of her had always felt unfinished, like a melody abruptly cut short. Today, however, the usual peace eluded her. The anniversary of Thomas's death was approaching, and the grief, usually a dull throb, had sharpened into a piercing pang. She felt adrift, untethered, the familiar landmarks of her life suddenly blurred and indistinct. Across the river, the ruins beckoned. They were a jumble of crumbling stone walls, overgrown with ivy and shadowed by towering pines. The air above them shimmered, almost as if distorted by heat, though the day was cool and crisp. Sylvain had always obeyed Alara's warning, never venturing closer than the riverbank. But today, something had shifted. A restless energy, a yearning for something she couldn't name, pulled at her. She glanced around. The woods were silent, save for the chirping of crickets and the distant caw of a crow. No one was watching. A sense of inevitability, of a path long ordained, settled over her. It was as if the river itself was urging her forward, its gentle whispers now a compelling siren's call. Taking a deep breath, Sylvain stepped into the icy water. It swirled around her ankles, shockingly cold, sending a shiver up her spine. She waded deeper, the current tugging at her skirts. The water reached her knees, then her thighs. The opposite bank, once a distant blur, grew sharper, more defined. She could see individual stones, the intricate carvings on a crumbling archway, the dark, gaping maw of what might have been a doorway. As she reached the other side, her boots sinking into the soft, muddy earth, the air thickened. It pressed against her, heavy and charged with an almost palpable energy. The scent of pine intensified, mingled with a strange, musky odor she couldn't place. It was both intoxicating and unsettling. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. The ruins rose around her, silent and imposing. The wind picked up, whistling through the broken walls, carrying with it the faintest echo of voices, a mournful chant, a woman's scream, a man's desperate plea. Sylvain shivered, but not from the cold. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled. A low rumble echoed through the ruins, growing in intensity. Sylvain stumbled, catching herself on a crumbling wall. Dust and small stones rained down around her. Torches, seemingly untouched by time, flared to life along the walls, casting flickering, orange light on the scene. They illuminated carvings she hadn't noticed before, wolves, intertwined with thorny vines, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. Panic clawed at her throat. She turned to flee, to return to the familiar safety of the riverbank, but it was too late. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the ruins, moving with a speed that defied logic. It coalesced into a form tall, imposing, undeniably male. He stepped into the torchlight, and Sylvain gasped. His hair was the color of midnight, his features sharp and angular, his skin pale in the flickering light. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of molten gold, intense and piercing, radiating an ancient power that seemed to strip away her defenses, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble, a sound that resonated deep within her bones. "You broke the pact," he murmured, the words heavy with accusation and something else, a hint of sorrow, perhaps? "Now you belong to me." His gaze locked onto hers, and Sylvain felt a jolt, a strange, unsettling connection that both terrified and thrilled her. What pact? What had she done? The questions whirled in her mind, unanswered, lost in the overwhelming presence of this man. This creature. Because no ordinary man could possess eyes like that, could move with such unnatural grace, could exude such raw, untamed power. He was something else. Something more. And she, it seemed, was inexplicably bound to him. Chapter 2. Echoes of a Broken Oath. The silence that followed his declaration was thick with unspoken tension. Sylvain, her heart hammering against her ribs, could only stare at the man if he was a man before her. His golden eyes seemed to see through her, to the very core of her being, stripping away the layers of composure she had carefully cultivated over the years. She felt exposed, vulnerable, a stark contrast to the quiet strength she usually projected. I don't understand, she finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. What pact? I've never even been here before. A flicker of something amusement? Contempt? Crossed his face. He took a step closer, and Sylvain instinctively recoiled, her back pressing against the cold, damp stone of the wall. The scent of him intensified that strange, musky odor, now mingled with the crispness of pine and the earthy smell of the ruins. It was both alluring and unsettling, awakening a primal awareness within her that she hadn't known existed. "Ignorance is no excuse," he said, his voice low and resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "The blood oath was sworn centuries ago, by your ancestors and mine. It bound our families, our destinies, for all time. And you, Sylvain Corbin, are the last of your line." His words struck her like a physical blow. Blood oath? Ancestors? Destinies? It sounded like something out of a Gothic novel, not the reality of her quiet, predictable life in Oakhaven. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog of confusion that clouded her mind. This is madness," she whispered. "I don't know anything about any oath." He tilted his head, his golden eyes studying her with an unnerving intensity. Perhaps, he conceded, a hint of something that might have been understanding softening his tone. Perhaps the knowledge was lost, buried beneath the weight of years and deliberate forgetting. But the magic remains. The bond endures. He reached out, his long, elegant fingers brushing against her cheek. Sylvain flinched, her skin tingling where he touched her. It wasn't an unpleasant sensation, but it was unsettling. There was a power in his touch, a raw, untamed energy that both frightened and fascinated her. "The oath was broken," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your ancestor, Alara, betrayed mine. She fled, taking with her the key to our power, the source of our strength. And in doing so, she cursed us both. Sylvain's hand went to the locket at her throat, her fingers tracing the outline of Alara's portrait. Alara? A betrayer? A curse? It was too much to take in. The image of her grandmother, gentle and loving, seemed to clash with the dark accusations of this creature. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice gaining a little strength, fueled by a surge of defiance. "My grandmother was a good woman. She would never." He cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Good? Perhaps. But she was also a thief. A coward. And her actions condemned us to this half-life. Trapped between worlds, bound to these ruins, forever yearning for what was stolen from us." His words, though harsh, carried a weight of sorrow, a deep-seated pain that resonated within Sylvain. She saw it in his eyes, in the subtle lines of tension around his mouth, in the way he clenched his fists at his sides. This wasn't just anger, it was a profound, ancient grief. What was stolen? She asked, her voice softer now, curiosity overcoming her fear. He hesitated, his gaze flickering towards the torchlit carvings of wolves on the walls. "Our freedom," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our ability to shift, to embrace our true nature." Sylvain's breath caught in her throat. Shift? True nature? The implications of his words were staggering. Werewolves. The folklore of Oakhaven, the stories whispered around campfires, the tales she had dismissed as childish fantasies, they were real. And she was standing face to face with one. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She reached out, her hand grasping the crumbling wall for support. The world seemed to tilt, the flickering torchlight blurring her vision. He was there instantly, his strong arm wrapping around her waist, steadying her. "Careful," he murmured, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The magic here is strong. It can be overwhelming." His closeness, the warmth of his body against hers, sent a jolt of awareness through her. She looked up at him, her violet eyes meeting his golden ones, and for a moment, the fear receded, replaced by a strange, inexplicable pull. She saw the weariness in his gaze, the centuries of loneliness etched onto his face. And she saw something else, a flicker of hope, a spark of something that mirrored the hesitant, fragile yearning that was beginning to bloom within her own heart. Who are you?" she whispered, the question escaping her lips before she could stop it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My name," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate deep within her soul, "is Reese." And, as Sylvain looked into his eyes, that connection, that strange and undeniable bond, began twisting and solidifying as she realized she may be standing face to face with something far more complex than a monster, her destiny. Chapter 3. The Wolf in the Shadows. Reese. The name echoed in Sylvain's mind, a whisper of sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. It felt both foreign and strangely familiar, like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered. His arm remained around her waist, a solid, reassuring presence in the unsettling reality she had stumbled into. The warmth of his touch seeped through her clothes, a stark contrast to the chill of the ruins and the icy fear that had gripped her moments before. She looked up at him, studying his face in the flickering torchlight. He was undeniably handsome, in a rugged, untamed way. High cheekbones, a strong jawline, a mouth that hinted at both sensuality and a capacity for cruelty. But it was his eyes, those mesmerizing golden eyes, that held her captive. They seemed to hold the secrets of the ages, the wisdom and sorrow of a creature who had seen too much, endured too much. "Reese," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt right. He inclined his head, a slight smile playing on his lips. "And you, Sylvain, are even more beautiful than the legends described." His words, spoken in that low, resonant voice, sent a shiver down her spine. Legends? What legends? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible situation she found herself in. "I still don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Werewolves curses blood oaths, it's all just stories." Reese sighed, his gaze shifting to the crumbling walls around them, the torchlight flickering across the carved images of wolves. Stories that have been passed down through generations, he said. Stories that hold a kernel of truth, however distorted by time and fear. We are real, Sylvain. The curse is real, and the bond between us that is the most real thing of all. He released her, stepping back slightly, but his gaze remained locked on hers. My people, the Lupins, were once powerful, free. We roamed these lands, living in harmony with nature, embracing our dual nature, human and wolf. But the oath, the broken promise, changed everything. He began to pace, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. Your ancestor, Alara, was betrothed to my ancestor, Alaric. It was a union meant to solidify the peace between our families, to strengthen our power. But Alara, she feared our nature. She saw us as monsters, not as beings deserving of love and respect. Sylvain listened, mesmerized, her heart aching with a strange, inexplicable sympathy for this creature, this wolf. His pain was palpable, a raw, open wound that seemed to bleed into the very air around them. She stole the moonstone. Rhys continued, his voice hardening with anger. A sacred artifact, the source of our connection to the moon, the key to our ability to shift. And with it, she fled, breaking the oath and condemning us to this shadow existence. He stopped pacing, turning to face her, his golden eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and despair. We are trapped, Sylvain, unable to fully embrace our wolf nature, unable to find peace. We are shadows, ghosts, haunting the edges of the world, forever yearning for what was stolen from us. Sylvain's hand went to the locket at her throat, her fingers tracing the outline of Alara's portrait. Could it be true? Could her beloved grandmother have been responsible for such a terrible act? The moonstone, she whispered. Where is it? Rhys shook his head. Lost. Hidden. Alara took the secret of its location to her grave. And with it, she took our hope. A wave of despair washed over Sylvain. She felt a profound sense of responsibility, a weight of guilt for the sins of her ancestor. It was an unfair burden, one she hadn't asked for, but it was hers nonetheless. But why me? She asked, her voice trembling. Why now? Rhys stepped closer, his gaze softening. Because you are the last of your line, he said. The magic of the oath is strongest in you. And because the moon is full. He gestured towards a gap in the crumbling walls, where the full moon hung like a silver coin in the inky sky. Its light bathed the ruins in an ethereal glow, casting long, dancing shadows. The full moon amplifies the magic, he explained. It strengthens the bond between us. It calls to us. As he spoke, Sylvain felt a strange pull, a deep, visceral yearning that seemed to emanate from the moon itself. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, a wild, untamed energy that both frightened and exhilarated her. Suddenly, a low growl rumbled from the shadows behind Rhys. Sylvain gasped, her eyes widening in fear. Another figure emerged, larger than Rhys, its eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. It was a wolf, but not like any wolf she had ever seen. It was massive, its fur the color of midnight, its muscles rippling beneath its skin. Rhys turned, his expression hardening. Cain, he said, his voice laced with warning. Stand down. The wolf Cain ignored him, its gaze fixed on Sylvain. It took a step forward, its growl deepening, its teeth bared in a menacing snarl. Sylvain felt a surge of pure terror, her body frozen in place. She was trapped, caught between two creatures of immense power, her fate hanging in the balance. And then, something changed, something shifted in Rhys's stance, a protective anger that was no longer directed at Sylvain. Chapter 4. A touch of ancient magic. Cain's growl vibrated through the ruins, a primal sound that sent shivers down Sylvain's spine. The massive wolf, its eyes burning with a predatory hunger, took another step towards her, its muscles coiled and ready to spring. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped Sylvain, stealing her breath and freezing her limbs. Rhys moved with lightning speed, positioning himself between Sylvain and Cain. His body was tense, his posture a clear warning. "I said, stand down," he repeated, his voice a low, guttural growl that mirrored Cain's, but with an underlying layer of authority. There was a subtle shift in his scent, too, the musky undertones intensifying, becoming sharper, more dominant. Cain hesitated, his gaze flickering between Sylvain and Rhys. The tension in the air was thick, palpable, a silent battle of wills between the two wolves. Sylvain could feel the power radiating from both of them, a raw, untamed energy that made the hair on her arms stand on end. "She broke the pact, Alpha," Cain said, his voice a rough, gravelly rumble, surprisingly articulate for a creature that appeared to be pure animal. "She belongs to us."
Alpha.
The word resonated with Sylvain. So Rhys was the leader, the dominant male. It explained the authority in his voice, the way Cain, despite his obvious aggression, hesitated to disobey him. "She is under my protection," Rhys countered, his golden eyes flashing. "You will not touch her." Cain snarled, his lip curling back to reveal long, sharp teeth. "The law is clear, Rhys." "The oath." "The oath is broken," Rhys interrupted, his voice rising in intensity. "And I will decide how to deal with the consequences." "Not you." The two wolves faced each other, a silent standoff that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Sylvain watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. She felt like a pawn in a game she didn't understand, a game with stakes far higher than she could comprehend. Finally, Cain lowered his head, a grudging submission. "As you command, Alpha," he muttered, his voice laced with resentment. He backed away, melting back into the shadows from which he had emerged, but Sylvain could still feel his eyes on her, a constant, unsettling presence. Rhys turned back to Sylvain, his expression softening. The tension in his body eased, the predatory aura receding, replaced by a more human demeanor. He reached out, his hand hovering over her arm, as if unsure whether to touch her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Sylvain nodded, her voice still trapped in her throat. She was shaken, terrified, but also strangely exhilarated. The raw power she had witnessed, the primal intensity of the two wolves, had awakened something within her, a dormant sense of wildness. He let his hand drop to his side. "Cain is overzealous," he said, a hint of apology in his tone. "He has suffered much because of the broken oath. He struggles to control his anger." Sylvain found her voice, though it was still shaky. He wanted to hurt me." Rhys nodded, his gaze darkening. "He would have," he admitted. "But I will not allow it. You are under my protection, Sylvain. I will keep you safe." His words, spoken with such conviction, sent a wave of warmth through her, a feeling of security that was both surprising and comforting. She looked up at him, her violet eyes meeting his golden ones, and for a moment, the fear receded, replaced by a flicker of trust.
"Why?"
she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you protecting me? I am the descendant of the woman who cursed you." Rhys sighed, his gaze shifting to the full moon hanging above them. "Because," he said, "I believe you are the key to breaking the curse." His words hung in the air, heavy with significance. Sylvain's mind raced, trying to grasp the implications. "She, the key?
How?"
"I don't understand," she said. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out again, this time gently touching her cheek. His fingers were warm against her skin, sending a jolt of awareness through her. It was a different sensation than before, less unsettling, more intimate. "The magic of the oath is strong in you, Sylvain," he said, his voice low and resonant. "I can feel it. And I believe there is more to Alara's story than we know. I believe there is a way to restore what was lost, to heal the rift between our families." He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "I need your help," he said. "Will you help me?" His eyes pleaded with her, a mixture of hope and desperation. Sylvain felt a strange pull, a deep, inexplicable connection to this creature, this wolf. She saw the pain in his gaze, the centuries of loneliness etched onto his face. And she saw something else, a spark of longing, a yearning for something more than the shadow existence he had endured. She nodded, her decision made, without conscious thought. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll help you." The words felt true, felt right, as though a deeper part of herself, a part she'd never tapped before, was answering. The moment she agreed, a soft, golden light sparked between where his fingers still rested against her cheek, a warm tingle that was visible proof of the magic he spoke of. A shared, unspoken destiny. Chapter 5. The Scent of Pine and Regret. The golden light, ephemeral and warm, faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a lingering tingle on Sylvain's cheek and a profound sense of connection. It was as if, with her agreement, a fragile thread had been woven between them, binding her to Rhys in a way she couldn't comprehend, yet felt instinctively. He withdrew his hand, a shadow of regret crossing his face. "Thank you, Sylvain," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have given me hope, something I had almost lost." The air around them seemed to shift, the oppressive weight of the ruins lifting slightly, replaced by a subtle hum of energy. The full moon, hanging high above, seemed to shine brighter, its silvery light illuminating the ancient stones with an ethereal glow. Sylvain took a deep breath, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. The scent of pine, mingled with Rhys's unique, musky odor, filled her nostrils, a strangely comforting aroma in this unsettling place. She realized she was no longer afraid, not in the same way she had been before. The terror had receded, replaced by a cautious curiosity, a hesitant trust. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice stronger now, steadier. Rhys gestured towards a crumbling archway, partially obscured by overgrown ivy.
"Come," he said.
"There is a place we can talk, away from prying eyes." He led her through the archway, into a smaller courtyard, overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. In the center stood a weathered stone fountain, its basin filled with rainwater reflecting the moon's silvery light. The air here felt different, lighter, less oppressive. "This was once a garden," Rhys said, his voice tinged with sadness. "A place of beauty and peace. Now it is just another ruin." Sylvain could almost imagine it, the vibrant colors, the fragrant blooms, the gentle murmur of the fountain. It was a stark contrast to the desolate, decaying reality. "Tell me about Alara," she said, turning to face him. "Tell me everything." Rhys leaned against the fountain, his gaze fixed on the moonlit water. He was silent for a long moment, as if gathering his thoughts, wrestling with the ghosts of the past. "Alara," he began, his voice low and resonant, was different. She was curious, adventurous, unlike the other women of her time. She was fascinated by our world, by the Lupins. She spent hours in the woods, observing us, learning our ways. Sylvain listened intently, her heart aching with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She had always felt a connection to Alara, a sense of shared spirit, despite the years that separated them. "She and Alaric, they fell in love," Rhys continued, his voice thick with emotion. "It was a forbidden love, a dangerous passion. But they were drawn to each other, like moths to a flame." He paused, his gaze shifting to Sylvain, his golden eyes searching hers. Their love was strong, but it was also fragile. The elders of both families opposed the union. They feared the consequences, the mixing of blood, the potential for chaos. Sylvain could understand the fear. The prejudice against werewolves, the ingrained belief that they were monsters, was a powerful force, even in her own time. "Alara, she tried to bridge the gap," Rhys said. "She believed that love could conquer all, that understanding and acceptance could overcome fear and prejudice. But she was naive." He shook his head, his expression filled with regret. The night of the bonding ceremony, the night they were to become one, something went wrong. There was a betrayal, a conspiracy. Alaric's own brother, driven by jealousy and ambition, sabotaged the ritual. Sylvain gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The story was unfolding like a tragic play, a tale of love and loss, betrayal and despair. The moonstone, Rhys continued, his voice hardening with anger, was meant to amplify the magic, to seal the bond. But instead, it fractured. The energy released was catastrophic. It ripped through the ceremony, injuring many, killing some. And it changed us. He looked at Sylvain, his golden eyes filled with pain. We lost our ability to fully shift, to control our wolf nature. We became trapped, bound to these ruins, forever haunted by the memory of what we had lost. And Ilara? Sylvain whispered. What happened to her? Rhys sighed, his gaze dropping to the ground. She was blamed, he said, accused of witchcraft, of deliberately causing the chaos. She fled, taking the moonstone with her, hoping to protect it, to find a way to undo the damage. He looked up at Sylvain, his expression filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. But I believe there is more to the story, he said. I believe Ilara was not a villain, but a victim. And I believe that somewhere, hidden within the secrets of the past, lies the key to breaking the curse. A shiver crawled across Sylvain's skin, a prickling awareness. What makes you so sure? Rhys gave a small, sad smile. Because when I touch you, Sylvain, I feel it. The curse, reacting. Weakening just a fraction. Your presence alone has a power I can't explain. A power tied to her, to the oath, to us. The implications of his words hung heavy in the moonlit air. Chapter 6. Unspoken promises, unseen threats. Rhys's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sylvain felt a tremor of unease, a sense of being caught in a web far larger and more complex than she could have ever imagined. Her presence, her very existence, seemed to be a catalyst, stirring ancient magic, awakening dormant powers. So, what do we do? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady, to mask the tremor of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. How do we find the moonstone? How do we break the curse? Rhys pushed himself away from the fountain, his gaze searching the moonlit ruins. I don't know, he admitted, his voice laced with frustration. The knowledge has been lost, buried beneath centuries of secrecy and mistrust. Ilara left no maps, no clues, only whispers. He turned to face her, his golden eyes intense.
But I believe we can find it, he said.
Together. We have to retrace Ilara's steps, uncover the secrets she kept hidden, decipher the whispers she left behind. Sylvain nodded, her mind already racing, trying to piece together the fragments of information she had. My grandmother, she left me this, she said, lifting the silver locket from her throat. It was hers. She never took it off. Rhys stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the locket. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cool metal, a spark of recognition flickering in his eyes. This, he murmured, his voice hushed with awe. This is Lupin craftsmanship. The silver it's infused with moon magic. It resonates. He gently opened the locket, revealing the miniature portrait of Ilara. He stared at the image, his expression softening. She was beautiful, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sylvain felt a pang of sadness, a shared grief for a love lost, a life tragically cut short. She saw in Rhys's eyes a reflection of her own yearning, her own desire to understand the past, to heal the wounds that had been festering for centuries. There's something else, Sylvain said, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the back of the locket. I always thought it was just decoration, but she turned the locket over, revealing a series of symbols etched into the silver. They were unlike any language she had ever seen, a series of swirling lines and intricate patterns. Rhys leaned closer, his breath warm against her skin. He traced the symbols with his fingertip, his expression growing increasingly intense. This, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is ancient Lupin script. A cipher. It's a code. Sylvain's heart skipped a beat. A code? Could it be? Could the locket hold the key to finding the moonstone, to breaking the curse?
Can you read it?
She asked, her voice filled with hope. Rhys hesitated. I recognize some of the symbols, he said. But the language, it's archaic, complex. It will take time to decipher it. He looked up at her, his golden eyes filled with determination.
But we will, he said.
We will unlock the secrets of the locket, and we will find the moonstone. A sudden noise, a rustling in the nearby bushes, broke the quiet intimacy of the moment. Rhys stiffened, his senses instantly alert. He stepped in front of Sylvain, his body shielding her, his posture radiating a protective vigilance. "What is it?" Sylvain whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. "Shoo," Rhys hissed, his gaze fixed on the shadows. "Someone's watching us." The rustling grew louder, closer. Sylvain could feel the hair on her arms stand on end, a primal instinct warning her of danger. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes and a cruel smile. He was dressed in dark clothing, a silver pendant, shaped like a wolf's head with crossed arrows beneath, glinting on his chest. He carried a crossbow, its arrow pointed directly at Rhys. Well, the man said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What have we here? The alpha and his pet?" Rhys's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "Silas," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "I should have known." Silas chuckled, a cold, menacing sound. "You can't hide forever, Rhys," he said. "The hunters will find you, and we will cleanse this land of your filth." Hunters. The word sent a chill down Sylvain's spine. Another piece of the puzzle, another threat in this dangerous game she had unwittingly become a part of. She was trapped, caught between two opposing forces, her fate hanging in the balance, uncertain of whom to trust, and terrified of the consequences if she chose wrong. The air crackled with unsaid threats, with ancient hatred, and a future far more perilous than she'd imagined mere hours ago. Chapter 7. The Dance of Moonlight and Fear. Silas's cruel smile widened, his piercing blue eyes fixated on Sylvain. The silver pendant on his chest, a wolf's head with crossed arrows, seemed to gleam with a malevolent light in the moonlight. The crossbow remained trained on Rhys, a silent, deadly threat. "This one," Silas said, his voice dripping with disdain. "She reeks of the curse. The last of the Corbin line. The key, as they say." Rhys's body remained tense, a shield between Sylvain and the hunter. His golden eyes blazed with fury, but his voice was controlled, deceptively calm. "Leave her out of this, Silas," he said. "This is between you and me." Silas chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, but she's already in it, Rhys," he said. "Drawn in by the whispers of the past, by the pull of the moon. She's a part of your pack now, and the hunters have a duty to eradicate all of you." Sylvain felt a surge of fear, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She had stumbled into a war, a centuries-old conflict between werewolves and hunters, a battle for survival, for power, for something she couldn't yet comprehend. "You're wrong," Sylvain said, her voice trembling slightly, but fueled by a surge of defiance. "I'm not a part of anything. I just want to understand." Silas ignored her, his gaze remaining locked on Rhys. "The moonstone, Rhys," he said. "Where is it? Tell me, and I might consider sparing the girl." Rhys didn't flinch. "You know I can't do that, Silas," he said. "The moonstone is not yours to take. It belongs to the Lupins." Silas's expression darkened. "Then you leave me no choice," he said. He raised the crossbow slightly, adjusting his aim. Sylvain gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She couldn't let him hurt Rhys. She didn't understand why, but she knew, instinctively, that she had to protect him. Before she could act, before she could even think, Rhys moved. With lightning speed, he lunged forward, knocking the crossbow from Silas's hand. The arrow discharged, embedding itself in a nearby tree with a sickening thud. The two men grappled, a blur of motion in the moonlight. Rhys, despite being unarmed, fought with a ferocity that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He moved with a grace and power that was clearly supernatural, his strength far exceeding that of a normal human. Sylvain watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to help, but she was frozen, paralyzed by fear and a sense of utter helplessness. Silas, though taken by surprise, was a skilled fighter. He landed a blow on Reese's jaw, sending him staggering back. Reese recovered quickly, retaliating with a series of swift strikes, his fists connecting with Silas's body with brutal force. The fight was a dance of moonlight and fear, a desperate struggle for survival. The air was filled with the sounds of grunts, growls, and the thud of blows. Sylvain felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. The raw power on display, the primal intensity of the conflict, awakened something within her, a dormant instinct, a fierce protectiveness. Suddenly, Silas pulled a silver dagger from his boot, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. He lunged at Reese, aiming for his heart. Sylvain screamed, a primal sound that ripped through the night. Reese saw the dagger at the last moment. He twisted his body, avoiding a direct hit, but the blade grazed his arm, drawing blood. A hiss of pain escaped his lips. Seeing Reese injured, something snapped within Sylvain. The fear, the helplessness, vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. She grabbed a large stone from the crumbling fountain, her hands shaking, but her resolve firm. She rushed forward, raising the stone above her head, and brought it down on Silas's back with all her might. Silas cried out in pain, stumbling forward, dropping the dagger. Reese seized the opportunity, tackling Silas to the ground, pinning him beneath him. Reese looked up at Sylvain, his golden eyes wide with surprise and something else. Admiration? Respect? Sylvain stood there, breathing heavily, the stone still clutched in her hand. She had acted instinctively, without thinking, driven by a primal urge to protect Reese. She had surprised herself, shocked at her own capacity for violence, for courage. The moment stretched, a tense tableau in the moonlit ruins. Then, from the surrounding woods, came the sound of approaching footsteps, multiple sets of them, accompanied by the baying of hounds. Reinforcements. Silas had not come alone. The hope that sparked with her actions began to fade. Chapter 8. Beneath a sky of shifting stars. The sound of approaching footsteps and the baying of hounds shattered the fragile tableau. Reese, still pinning Silas to the ground, looked up at Sylvain, his golden eyes filled with urgency. "Go," he said, his voice a low, guttural growl.
"Run. Get out of here."
Sylvain hesitated, her gaze flickering between Reese and the encroaching sounds of the hunters. She couldn't leave him, not like this. She had helped him, intervened, and now she felt responsible. But she began, her voice trembling. "There's no time," Reese interrupted, his grip tightening on Silas, who was struggling to free himself. "They'll kill you, Sylvain. You have to go." He looked at her, his eyes pleading, a mixture of fear and desperation. He was protecting her, putting her safety above his own. Sylvain knew he was right. She was no match for a group of armed hunters. She would only be a burden, a liability. Where do I go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reese nodded towards a narrow passage, barely visible between the crumbling walls. "Follow that path," he said. "It leads to the old mill. It's abandoned. You'll be safe there for a while." He met her gaze, a silent promise passing between them. A promise of survival, of reunion, of something more. Sylvain nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned and ran, stumbling through the darkness, her lungs burning, her legs aching. She could hear the hunters closing in, their voices growing louder, their hounds baying with a bloodthirsty frenzy. She followed the path, her feet slipping on the uneven ground, her body brushing against thorny bushes that tore at her clothes and skin. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. She had to trust Reese. She had to believe that he would be all right. The old mill loomed before her, a dark, imposing silhouette against the starry sky. It was a crumbling, dilapidated structure, its windows boarded up, its roof partially collapsed. It looked haunted. But it was also a refuge, a temporary sanctuary. Sylvain slipped through a broken doorway, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The interior was dark and dusty, the air thick with the smell of decay and mildew. Moonlight streamed through cracks in the walls, casting eerie shadows that danced and shifted around her. She leaned against a wall, trying to catch her breath, trying to calm the racing of her heart. She was safe for now, but the fear remained, a cold knot in her stomach. What would happen to Reese? Would the hunters capture him? Would they kill him? And what about her? She was alone, in an unfamiliar place, hunted by a group of men who wanted to eradicate her. She was caught in a world she didn't understand, a world of werewolves and hunters, curses and ancient magic. She closed her eyes, her mind replaying the events of the evening. The whispers of the river, Reese's golden eyes, the broken oath, the moonstone, the fight with Silas, the approaching hunters. It was all too much, too overwhelming. A wave of exhaustion washed over her. She slid down the wall, her body sinking to the dusty floor. She curled up in a ball, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to find some comfort, some warmth, in the cold, desolate mill. She thought of Reese, of his strength, his courage, his protectiveness. She felt a strange, inexplicable connection to him, a bond that had formed in the crucible of danger and fear. She didn't understand it, but she felt it, deep within her soul. As she drifted off to sleep, exhausted and scared, she found herself clutching the silver locket, Alara's locket. It was a tangible link to the past, a reminder of the secrets she had to uncover, the curse she had to break. The dreams came, vivid and unsettling. Images of wolves running through moonlit forests, of a woman fleeing in terror, of a silver stone glowing with an ethereal light. Voices whispered in her ear, ancient words, forgotten languages. She saw Alara, young and beautiful, her eyes filled with both love and fear. She saw Alaric, Reese's ancestor, his face a mask of pain and betrayal. She saw the moonstone, shattered and broken, its light extinguished. And she saw Reese, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Help me, Sylvain," he whispered. "Help me break the curse." She woke with a start, her heart pounding, her body covered in a cold sweat. The first rays of dawn were beginning to filter through the cracks in the walls, painting the dusty interior of the mill in shades of gray and pink. The dream remained vivid in her mind, a haunting premonition, a call to action. She knew what she had to do. She had to find the moonstone. She had to break the curse. Not just for Reese, but for herself, for Alara, for all those who had suffered because of the broken oath. The sky outside was a canvas of pink and gray, the stars above fading with the rising sun. She knew this was just the beginning of her journey. Chapter 9. The Burden of a Forgotten Past. The pale light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the mill's walls, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Sylvain stirred, her body stiff and aching from her uncomfortable sleep on the cold, hard floor. The remnants of the dream clung to her, vivid and unsettling, a haunting reminder of the task that lay ahead. She sat up, pushing herself away from the wall, her gaze sweeping the interior of the mill. It was a desolate, decaying place, a relic of a bygone era. Cobwebs hung like macabre tapestries from the rafters, and the air was thick with the smell of dust and mildew. But it was also peaceful, a sanctuary from the chaos and danger of the night before. She reached for the locket at her throat, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the silver. Alara's locket. The key, perhaps, to unlocking the secrets of the past, to finding the moonstone, to breaking the curse. She opened the locket, gazing at the miniature portrait of Alara. The young woman's violet eyes, so like her own, seemed to stare back at her, filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. Sylvain felt a surge of empathy, a connection to this ancestor she had never known, but whose fate was now inextricably linked to her own. She turned the locket over, examining the ancient Lupin script etched into the back. The symbols were complex, intricate, a language she didn't understand, but which Reese had promised to help her decipher. Reese. The thought of him sent a pang of anxiety through her. Where was he? Had he escaped the hunters? Was he injured? She had to find him. She had to know if he was all right. She stood up, brushing the dust from her clothes, her resolve hardening. She couldn't stay here, hiding in the shadows. She had to act, to take control of her destiny, to unravel the mysteries of the past. She slipped out of the mill, her senses alert, her gaze scanning the surrounding woods. The early morning air was crisp and cool, the dew-covered leaves glistening in the sunlight. The forest was quiet, peaceful, the sounds of the night before the baying of hounds, the shouts of the hunters a distant memory. But the danger remained, a constant, unseen presence. Sylvain knew she had to be careful to avoid detection. She couldn't return to Oakhaven, not yet. The hunters would be watching for her, waiting for her. She decided to head back towards the ruins, towards the river. It was a risky move, but she felt drawn to that place, to the source of the magic, to the heart of the mystery. She walked slowly, cautiously, keeping to the shadows, her ears straining for any sound that might betray the presence of others. The forest was alive with the sounds of birdsong and the rustling of leaves, a stark contrast to the darkness and fear of the night before. As she approached the river, she saw a figure standing on the bank, his back to her. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of midnight. Reese. Relief washed over her, a wave of emotion so intense that it brought tears to her eyes. He was alive, he was safe. She ran towards him, her heart pounding in her chest. Reese. She called out, her voice filled with a mixture of joy and relief. He turned, his golden eyes widening in surprise. He had a bandage wrapped around his arm, covering the wound from Silas's dagger, but otherwise, he seemed unharmed. He opened his arms, and Sylvain ran into them, embracing him tightly. He held her close, his body warm and solid, a reassuring presence in this chaotic world. Sylvain, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. You're all right. I was so worried. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him, her eyes searching his. I was so scared, she said, her voice trembling. I thought they had captured you. He smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile that eased the tension in her heart. I escaped, he said. It wasn't easy, but I managed. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with concern. Are you hurt? He asked. She shook her head. I'm fine, she said. Just shaken. He led her to a nearby rock, and they sat down together, the river flowing gently beside them. The sun was rising higher, casting a golden glow over the water, the trees, the ruins. What happened? Sylvain asked, her gaze fixed on his bandaged arm. How did you get away? Reese sighed, his expression darkening. It was a close call, he said. Silas, he's relentless. And he had more hunters with him than I anticipated. He recounted the events of the night, how he had fought his way free, using his knowledge of the ruins, of the hidden passages, to evade his pursuers. He had been wounded, but he had managed to escape, to find his way back to the river, hoping to find her. Sylvain listened, her heart aching with sympathy for him, for the constant danger he faced, the burden he carried. We have to find the moonstone, Reese, she said, her voice filled with determination. We have to break the curse. He nodded, his gaze meeting hers. I know, he said. And we will. Together. He reached out, his fingers tracing the locket that rested against her skin. This, he said, his voice soft. This may be the key. The weight of their shared mission, the gravity of the ancient curse, settled upon them both, a heavy but strangely unifying presence in the golden morning light. Chapter 10. A glimmer of trust in the darkness. Reese's fingers lingered on the locket, the cool metal a contrast to the warmth of his touch. The shared understanding, the silent promise that had passed between them earlier, solidified in that moment. They were bound together, not just by the curse, but by a growing sense of trust, of something more. We should return to the ruins, Reese said, his voice breaking the quiet intimacy of the moment. There's a chamber beneath the old temple where we can study the locket, try to decipher the code. Sylvain nodded, her mind already racing, trying to anticipate the challenges that lay ahead. The ruins were dangerous, a hunting ground for both werewolves and hunters, but they also held the secrets of the past, the key to breaking the curse. They walked back towards the ruins, keeping to the shadows, their senses alert for any sign of danger. The air was still, the forest quiet, but the tension remained, a constant, underlying hum. Reese led her through a hidden passage, concealed behind a crumbling wall, into a dark, subterranean chamber. The air here was cool and damp, the smell of earth and stone heavy in the air. Torches, seemingly untouched by time, flared to life as they entered, casting flickering, orange light on the walls. The chamber was circular, with a high, vaulted ceiling. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with ancient scrolls and leather-bound books. In the center of the room stood a large stone table, its surface covered in intricate carvings. This was the scriptorium, Reese said, his voice echoing in the stillness. Where the Lupin elders studied, where they kept their knowledge, their history. Sylvain gazed around the chamber, her eyes wide with awe. It was like stepping back in time, into a world of ancient magic, of forgotten lore. She felt a sense of reverence, a connection to the past, to the ancestors who had walked these halls, who had struggled with the same curse that now burdened her and Reese. Reese placed the locket on the stone table, the silver gleaming in the torchlight. He retrieved a magnifying glass from one of the shelves and a small, leather-bound book. "This is a lexicon," he said, opening the book to a page filled with ancient Lupin symbols. "It may help us to decipher the code." They spent hours in the chamber, poring over the locket, studying the symbols, comparing them to the lexicon. The work was slow, painstaking, the language archaic and complex. But gradually, painstakingly, they began to make progress. Sylvain, surprisingly, found she had an aptitude for the work. She recognized patterns, identified connections that Reese, steeped in the traditional lore of his people, had initially overlooked. Her years of solving crossword puzzles and Sudoku, seemingly frivolous pastimes, now proved unexpectedly useful. Reese watched her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You have a gift, Sylvain," he said. "A natural intuition for this language." Sylvain smiled, a flicker of warmth spreading through her. It was a small thing, a simple compliment, but it meant the world to her. It was a validation of her worth, of her contribution to this partnership. As they worked, they talked. They shared stories, memories, fears. Sylvain told Reese about her life in Oakhaven, about her late husband, Thomas, about her quiet, predictable existence before she had crossed the river, before she had stumbled into this world of werewolves and curses. Reese, in turn, told her about his life as Alpha, about the responsibilities he carried, the challenges he faced, the constant threat of the hunters. He spoke of his longing for freedom, for a return to the days when the Lupins roamed free, when they embraced their dual nature, when they lived in harmony with the world. The more they talked, the closer they became. The walls of mistrust, of fear, began to crumble, replaced by a fragile, tentative bond. They were two souls, from different worlds, brought together by fate, by a shared destiny. As the day wore on, they finally managed to decipher the code on the locket. It was a series of coordinates, a location hidden deep within the forest, a place known only to the ancient Lupins. "This," Reese said, his voice filled with excitement. "This could be it. This could be where Alara hid the moonstone." Sylvain felt a surge of hope, a flicker of excitement. They were one step closer to breaking the curse, to freeing Reese and his people, to finding peace for herself. But as darkness fell, and they prepared to leave the chamber, a sense of unease settled over Sylvain. The hunters were still out there, searching for them. And Silas, he would not give up easily. The glimmer of trust they had cultivated was precious, but it was also fragile, vulnerable to the shadows that surrounded them, threatened by the dangers that lay ahead. And a chilling premonition told her their journey was only growing more perilous. Chapter 11. The Price of Forbidden Longing. The air outside the scriptorium was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Night had fallen, casting the ruins in deep shadow, the full moon hidden behind a veil of clouds. The sense of unease that had settled over Sylvain intensified, a prickling awareness of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. "We need to be careful," Rhys said, his voice low and cautious. "The hunters will be watching for us." Sylvain nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She clutched the locket, the deciphered coordinates now a tangible weight in her hand, a symbol of hope, but also of risk. They moved silently through the ruins, keeping to the shadows, their senses alert for any sign of movement, any sound that might betray the presence of others. Rhys led the way, his body tense, his posture radiating a protective vigilance. As they approached the edge of the ruins, a flicker of movement caught Sylvain's eye. She grabbed Rhys's arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "There," she whispered, pointing towards a cluster of trees.
I saw something.
Rhys followed her gaze, his golden eyes narrowing. He could sense it too, a subtle disturbance in the air, a faint scent of human. "Stay here," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He moved forward, silently, like a predator stalking its prey, melting into the shadows. Sylvain waited, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. She felt vulnerable, exposed, a stark contrast to the strength and confidence she had felt in the scriptorium. A few moments later, Rhys returned, his expression grim. "It's Cain," he said. "He's watching us." Sylvain's blood ran cold. Cain, the aggressive wolf who had challenged Rhys, who had wanted to hurt her. Why was he here? What did he want? "We need to go," she said, her voice trembling. He'll alert the hunters." Rhys hesitated.
"No," he said. "We need to talk to him.
"We need to understand why he's following us." Sylvain was terrified, but she trusted Rhys. She knew he wouldn't put her in danger, not intentionally. They approached Cain, who stood silently beneath the trees, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. He was in his human form, but his posture, his demeanor, radiated a primal intensity, a barely contained wildness. "Cain," Rhys said, his voice firm, but not aggressive. "What are you doing here?" Cain's gaze flickered between Rhys and Sylvain, his expression unreadable. I wanted to see for myself," he said, his voice rough, gravelly. "To see if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" Rhys asked, his eyes narrowing. Cain hesitated. That you have found a way to break the curse," he said. "That you are working with a Corbin woman." Rhys's expression hardened. "The curse affects us all, Cain," he said. "We need to work together, not against each other."
Cain scoffed.
"Together?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "With the descendant of the woman who cursed us? You are a fool, Rhys." Sylvain felt a surge of anger, a flash of defiance. She stepped forward, her chin raised, her violet eyes meeting Cain's. "I am not my ancestor," she said, her voice firm, despite the tremor of fear that ran through her. "I am not responsible for her actions. But I am trying to fix them. I am trying to help." Cain stared at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, tense and uncomfortable. Suddenly, Cain's gaze shifted, his eyes widening in something that looked like fear. He took a step back, his hand going to his chest. "What is it?" Rhys asked, his voice sharp. Cain shook his head, his eyes darting around, as if searching for something in the shadows. They're here," he whispered. "The hunters." Before Rhys or Sylvain could react, figures emerged from the darkness, surrounding them. Silas, his face a mask of cruel triumph, stood at the forefront, his crossbow raised, its arrow pointed directly at Rhys. "It seems your alliance has been discovered," Silas said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A werewolf and a Corbin, working together. How touching." He gestured to his men, and they moved forward, their weapons trained on Rhys and Sylvain. Rhys pushed Sylvain behind him, shielding her with his body. "Run, Sylvain," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Get out of here." But it was too late. They were trapped, surrounded, outnumbered. Sylvain felt a surge of despair, a crushing sense of hopelessness. This was it, the end. And then, something unexpected happened. "Cain," The wolf, who had been so hostile, so distrustful, stepped forward, positioning himself between Rhys and Silas. "Leave them alone," Cain said, his voice a low, guttural growl. Silas laughed, a cold, menacing sound. "You're defending them?" he said. "You're siding with the alpha? With the Corbin woman?" Cain didn't answer. He simply stood there, his body tense, his eyes blazing with a fierce defiance. He was protecting them, risking his own life to save them. The standoff was broken by a sudden, sharp pain in Sylvain's chest. A searing, burning sensation that stole her breath and brought her to her knees. She looked down and saw a silver arrow protruding from her shoulder, its tip stained crimson. She had been shot. Rhys roared, a primal sound of rage and despair. He lunged forward, attacking Silas with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold. But the hunters were too many, and Sylvain's vision was fading to a dim, distant gray, with Rhys the last figure she saw before darkness consumed her. The forbidden longing between them, that fragile hope, now seemed a distant, impossible dream. Chapter 12. Scars that time cannot erase.
Pain.
A searing, throbbing agony that consumed Sylvain's consciousness, dragging her back from the brink of oblivion. She gasped, her lungs burning, her body trembling, her mind struggling to make sense of the chaos, of the darkness that had enveloped her. She was lying on something soft, a makeshift bed of leaves and moss, her shoulder bandaged with strips of cloth torn from Rhys's shirt. She remembered the silver arrow, the searing pain, Rhys's roar of rage, and then nothing. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over her, forcing her back down. Her head swam, her vision blurred, the world tilting precariously around her. "Easy," a voice murmured, a low, resonant sound that soothed her frayed nerves. "Don't try to move." Rhys. He was here, kneeling beside her, his golden eyes filled with concern, with tenderness. She felt a surge of relief, a warmth that spread through her chilled body, chasing away the lingering darkness. What happened?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. Rhys gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "You were shot," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Silas, he shot you with a silver arrow." Silver. The word resonated with her, a reminder of the danger, of the prejudice, of the curse that had brought them to this point. Silver, the bane of werewolves, a poison that burned and weakened them. "But I'm not," she began, confusion clouding her mind. "The arrow was meant for me," Rhys interrupted, his gaze darkening. "It grazed you, but the silver still did its damage." He explained how Cain had intervened, distracting the hunters, giving Rhys the opportunity to carry her away, to bring her to this hidden cave, deep within the forest. He had removed the arrow, cleaned the wound, and bandaged it as best he could. "Cain," Sylvain whispered, her mind struggling to grasp the unexpected turn of events. "He saved us?" Rhys nodded, his expression a mixture of surprise and respect. "He did," he said. "He put himself in danger. He defied Silas for us." Sylvain didn't understand. Cain had been so hostile, so distrustful. Why had he changed? What had prompted him to risk his own life to save them? Rhys seemed to read her mind. "I don't know," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Perhaps he realized that the curse affects us all, that we are stronger together than divided. Perhaps he saw something in you, Sylvain, something that changed his mind. Sylvain felt a strange mixture of gratitude and unease. She was grateful for Cain's intervention, but she couldn't forget his previous hostility, his desire to hurt her. Trust, she realized, was a fragile thing, easily broken, difficult to earn. Rhys helped her to sit up, propping her against the cave wall. He offered her water from a leather flask, and she drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. "Where are we?" she asked, looking around the cave. It was small, but dry, the air surprisingly fresh. A small fire burned in the center, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "A hidden place," Rhys said, "known only to a few of the Lupins. We should be safe here for a while." But even as he said the words, Sylvain felt a sense of foreboding, a premonition that their respite was temporary, that the danger was far from over. They spent the next few days in the cave, tending to Sylvain's wound, resting, recovering. Rhys was a surprisingly gentle and attentive caregiver, his touch soothing, his presence reassuring. As her physical strength returned, Sylvain's thoughts turned to the locket, to the coordinates, to the moonstone. They had come so close, only to be thwarted by Silas and the hunters. "We can't give up, Rhys," she said, her voice firm, despite the lingering pain in her shoulder. "We have to find the moonstone. We have to break the curse." Rhys nodded, his golden eyes filled with determination. "I know," he said. "And we will. But we need a plan. We need to be smarter, more cautious." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "And we need to understand what happened between Cain and Silas," he said. "There's something more going on, something we're missing." Sylvain agreed. Cain's actions had been too unexpected. There was a piece of the puzzle missing, a secret that lay hidden beneath the surface. As the days passed, a deeper connection formed between Sylvain and Rhys, a bond forged in adversity, in shared danger, in mutual respect. They talked, they shared stories, they dreamed together. But there was also a tension, a forbidden longing that simmered beneath the surface. They were drawn to each other, irresistibly, but the curse, the history, the danger, stood between them, a seemingly insurmountable barrier. The scars of the past, both visible and unseen, were a constant reminder of the price of their forbidden connection. A price they might both be forced to pay. Chapter 13. The Hunters and the Hunted. The days in the hidden cave passed in a strange, surreal blur. Time seemed to lose its meaning, measured only by the rising and setting of the sun, by the waxing and waning of the moon, by the slow, gradual healing of Sylvain's wound. Rhys was a constant presence, a source of strength and comfort, his golden eyes filled with a tenderness that both warmed and unsettled her. He tended to her wound, brought her food and water, shared stories of his life, of the Lupins, of the world beyond Oakhaven. Sylvain, in turn, shared her own stories, her own fears, her own hopes. She spoke of her late husband, Thomas, of her quiet, predictable life before the river, before Rhys, before the curse. The more they talked, the closer they became. The walls of mistrust, of fear, continued to crumble, replaced by a fragile, tentative bond, a connection that defied logic, that transcended the boundaries of their different worlds. But the forbidden longing remained, a constant, simmering tension that hung heavy in the air. They were drawn to each other, irresistibly, but the curse, the history, the danger, stood between them, a seemingly insurmountable barrier. One evening, as they sat by the fire, sharing a meager meal of dried meat and berries, Rhys broke the silence. "We need to leave," he said, his voice low and serious. "We can't stay here forever. The hunters will be searching for us." Sylvain nodded, her heart heavy with a mixture of fear and reluctance. She had grown accustomed to the peace, the seclusion, the intimacy of the cave. Leaving meant facing the danger, the uncertainty, the reality of their situation. "Where will we go?" she asked. Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with determination. "To the coordinates," he said. "To the place where Ilara hid the moonstone." Sylvain felt a surge of hope, a flicker of excitement. They had deciphered the code, they had a destination, a purpose. But she also knew that the journey would be perilous, that the hunters would be waiting, that Silas would stop at nothing to prevent them from succeeding. They left the cave under the cover of darkness, moving silently through the forest, keeping to the shadows, their senses alert for any sign of danger. Rhys led the way, his body tense, his posture radiating a protective vigilance. As they walked, Sylvain couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that they were being followed. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the trees, the shadows, but she saw nothing. "Rhys," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I think we're being followed." Rhys stopped, his gaze sweeping the surrounding forest. He could sense it too, a subtle disturbance in the air, a faint scent of human, and something else, something familiar. "It's Kane," he said, his voice low and cautious. "He's tracking us." Sylvain's blood ran cold.
Kane. Why was he following them?
Was he friend or foe? She didn't know. She couldn't trust him, not yet. They continued walking, their pace quickening, their anxiety growing with each step. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees looming like menacing figures, the shadows dancing and shifting like living things. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the darkness, blocking their path. It was Kane, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. Rhys stepped in front of Sylvain, shielding her with his body. "Kane," he said, his voice firm but not aggressive. "What do you want?" Kane's gaze flickered between Rhys and Sylvain. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice rough, gravelly. "Alone." Rhys hesitated. He didn't trust Kane, but he also sensed that something had changed, that the wolf was not here to harm them.
"Sylvain, stay here," he said.
He turned to Kane. "Let's talk." The two wolves moved away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Sylvain alone, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. She waited, listening intently, trying to decipher the muffled sounds of their conversation. She couldn't make out the words, but she could sense the tension, the urgency, the something else. Something that sounded like agreement. After what seemed like an eternity, Rhys returned, his expression different. He was no longer tense, no longer wary. He seemed relieved. "What happened?" Sylvain asked, her voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "What did he say?" Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a strange mixture of emotions. "He told me the truth," he said. "About Silas, about the hunters, about everything." He explained that Kane had been working undercover, infiltrating the hunters, gathering information, trying to find a way to stop them. He had been forced to play the role of the enemy, to betray Rhys, to gain Silas's trust. "He risked his life," Rhys said, his voice filled with admiration. "He did it to protect us, to protect the Lupins." Sylvain was stunned. Kane, the aggressive, hostile wolf, had been a spy? A protector? It was too much to take in, too much to believe.
"But why?"
she asked. "Why would he do that?" Rhys sighed. "Because," he said, "Silas is not who he seems to be. He's not just a hunter, he's something more. Something darker." He explained that Silas was obsessed with the Moonstone, not to destroy it, but to use its power for his own nefarious purposes. He wanted to control the Lupins, to exploit their abilities, to rule the world. Kane had learned of Silas's twisted ambitions and his manipulation of the other hunters, turning them against not only werewolves but others deemed unnatural. Kane had been gathering evidence, playing a long and dangerous game, waiting for the right moment to expose him. And, with that, came a terrifying conclusion. The hunters were no longer just hunting werewolves. They were hunting anyone connected to the supernatural. And Sylvain, with her bloodline, her connection to the curse, and the locket was now a prime target. Chapter 14. A Revelation in the Ruins. The revelation of Silas's true nature, of his twisted ambitions, and the expanded scope of the hunter's targets hung heavy in the air, a chilling premonition of the dangers that lay ahead. Sylvain felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach, a sense of vulnerability that was both terrifying and strangely familiar. She had always felt like an outsider, different, somehow cursed. "We need to get to the Moonstone," Rhys said, his voice urgent, breaking the silence. "We need to get there before Silas does." He explained that Kane had given him a map, a detailed drawing of a location indicated by the coordinates on the locket. It was a hidden chamber, deep within the ruins, a place known only to a select few of the ancient Lupins. "Kane will distract the hunters," Rhys said. "He will lead them away from the ruins, give us a chance to reach the Moonstone." Sylvain nodded, her mind racing, trying to process the information, to formulate a plan. She trusted Rhys. She trusted Kane. Now. But the danger was real, the stakes were high, and the odds were stacked against them. They set off again, moving quickly through the forest, their pace fueled by a sense of urgency, of desperation. The moon was high in the sky, casting long, dancing shadows, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. As they approached the ruins, Sylvain felt a strange pull, a deep, visceral connection to the ancient stones, to the magic that pulsed beneath the surface. It was as if the ruins themselves were calling to her, guiding her, beckoning her towards her destiny. They entered the ruins through a hidden passage, the same one Rhys had used before, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The air here was cool and damp, the smell of earth and stone heavy in the air. Rhys led her through a maze of crumbling corridors and overgrown courtyards, his knowledge of the ruins intimate and precise. He moved with a confidence, a certainty, that calmed Sylvain's fears, that reassured her that they were on the right path. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber, its walls lined with intricate carvings of wolves, intertwined with thorny vines, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, its surface smooth and polished, bathed in the silvery light of the moon. "This is it," Rhys said, his voice hushed with awe. "This is the place." Sylvain felt a surge of excitement, a flicker of hope. They were here. They had made it. They were one step closer to breaking the curse, to freeing Rhys and his people, to finding peace for herself. Rhys approached the altar, his hand reaching out to touch the smooth, cool stone. He closed his eyes, his body tense, his senses alert. "The moonstone," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's close. I can feel it." He began to examine the altar, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings, searching for a hidden mechanism, a secret passage. Sylvain watched him, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. Suddenly, Rhys stopped, his hand freezing on a particular carving, a wolf's head with its mouth open, as if howling at the moon. He pressed down on the carving, and a click echoed through the chamber. A section of the altar slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a stone, a smooth, oval-shaped object that glowed with a soft, ethereal light. "The moonstone!" Sylvain gasped, her eyes wide with awe. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, radiating a power that she could feel deep within her soul. It was the key, the source of the Lupin's strength, the object of Silas's twisted desires. Rhys reached into the compartment, his fingers gently closing around the moonstone. He lifted it out, holding it up to the moonlight, its light intensifying, bathing the chamber in an ethereal glow. As he held the moonstone, Sylvain felt a surge of energy, a tingling sensation that spread through her body, from the tips of her toes to the roots of her hair. She felt stronger, more alive, more connected. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. A voice, cold and menacing, echoed through the chamber. "Well, well, well," Silas said, stepping out of the shadows, his crossbow raised, its arrow pointed directly at Rhys. "It seems I arrived just in time." He was not alone. Several hunters, armed with crossbows and swords, flanked him, their faces grim, their eyes filled with hatred. Sylvain's heart sank. They were trapped, outnumbered, outgunned. The hope that had blossomed moments before withered and died, replaced by a crushing sense of despair. They had failed. And as Silas smirked, the expression of a predator who had finally cornered his prey, Sylvain knew that this confrontation would change everything, forever. Chapter 15. The Crimson Thread of Fate. Silas's cruel smile widened, his piercing blue eyes fixated on the moonstone in Rhys's hand. The hunters flanking him shifted, their weapons trained on Rhys and Sylvain, their expressions grim and determined. The air in the chamber crackled with tension, with the imminent threat of violence. "The moonstone," Silas said, his voice dripping with a mixture of triumph and greed. "At last. It's mine." Rhys didn't flinch. He held the moonstone aloft, its ethereal light illuminating his face, his golden eyes blazing with defiance. "It belongs to the Lupins," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "You will not have it." Silas chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "You are in no position to bargain, Werewolf," he said. "Surrender the moonstone, and I might consider sparing your lives." Sylvain knew it was a lie. Silas had no intention of sparing them. He wanted the moonstone, and he would kill anyone who stood in his way. "Rhys," she whispered, her voice trembling, her hand reaching for his arm. He squeezed her hand, reassuringly, but his gaze remained locked on Silas. "We will not surrender," he said, his voice low and resolute. Silas sighed, dramatically.
"So be it," he said.
"Hunters kill them." The hunters raised their crossbows, their fingers tightening on the triggers. Sylvain closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable, for the searing pain of the silver arrows. But the expected volley never came. Instead, a roar echoed through the chamber, a primal sound of rage and fury.
"Cain."
He burst into the chamber, a blur of motion, his wolf form massive and terrifying. He attacked the hunters with a savage ferocity, his claws and teeth tearing through flesh and bone. The hunters, taken by surprise, scattered, their formation breaking, their carefully laid plans dissolving into chaos. Rhys seized the opportunity. He handed the moonstone to Sylvain. "Protect it," he said, his voice urgent. "With your life." He then shifted, his body transforming, his bones cracking and reshaping, his skin rippling and growing fur. He became the wolf, the alpha, his golden eyes gleaming with a primal power. He joined Cain in the fight, the two wolves a whirlwind of claws and teeth, a force of nature unleashed upon the hunters. Sylvain watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind reeling from the sudden turn of events. She clutched the moonstone to her chest, its warmth seeping through her clothes, its energy pulsing through her veins. The battle raged, a chaotic melee of werewolves and hunters, of silver and steel, of blood and fury. The air was filled with the sounds of growls, screams, and the clang of weapons. Sylvain, caught in the midst of the chaos, felt a surge of something. A power, a strength, a connection to the moonstone, to the ancient magic that pulsed within it. She looked at Silas, who was watching the fight with a mixture of fury and fear. He had underestimated the wolves, he had underestimated Cain, and he had underestimated her. Sylvain raised the moonstone, its light intensifying, bathing the chamber in an ethereal glow. She felt a surge of energy, a tingling sensation that spread through her body, from the tips of her toes to the roots of her hair. She focused her mind, her will, on Silas, channeling the energy of the moonstone towards him. A beam of light shot from the stone, striking Silas in the chest, throwing him backwards against the wall. He cried out in pain, his body convulsing, his eyes wide with terror. The silver pendant he wore, the symbol of the hunters, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The remaining hunters, seeing their leader fall, hesitated, their resolve faltering. They looked at each other, their faces filled with fear and confusion. Rhys and Cain, sensing the shift in momentum, pressed their attack, driving the hunters back, forcing them to retreat. The hunters fled, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Silas lying on the floor, his body twitching, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Rhys and Cain shifted back to their human forms, their bodies bruised and battered, but their spirits unbroken. They had won, they had survived, they had protected the moonstone. Sylvain ran to Rhys, embracing him tightly, her body trembling with relief. "You're all right," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He held her close, his body warm and solid, a reassuring presence in this chaotic world. "We did it, Sylvain," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it together." But as they stood there, in the aftermath of the battle, Sylvain felt a sense of unease, a premonition that the victory was fleeting, that the war was far from over. Silas was defeated, but not dead. And the curse remained. A crimson thread of fate began to unwind, as Sylvain looked down at the moonstone. The light seemed to pulse, responding to her. And for the first time, she saw a flicker, a glimpse of a vision, a path forward, a dangerous and uncertain future. but a future where the curse could be broken. Chapter 16. Echoes of laughter, whispers of pain. The aftermath of the battle left the chamber in disarray. Dust motes danced in the lingering moonlight filtering through the cracks in the ruined walls, illuminating scattered debris and the lingering scent of blood and fear. Sylvain, still clutching the moonstone, felt a tremor run through her, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and a lingering unease. The victory felt fragile. Rhys, his body bearing the marks of the fight, gently guided her away from the fallen Silas towards a relatively undamaged corner of the chamber. Cain, his expression unreadable, followed them, his presence a silent reassurance, a testament to his unexpected loyalty. "We need to leave," Rhys said, his voice low and urgent. "Silas, he may not be dead. And even if he is, others will come." Sylvain nodded, her mind still reeling from the events that had just transpired. The vision she had experienced, the glimpse of a possible future, a path towards breaking the curse, had left her both hopeful and terrified. As they prepared to leave, Sylvain noticed something glinting on the floor, near where Silas had fallen. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box, partially hidden beneath a pile of rubble. "What's that?" she asked, pointing towards the box. Rhys followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing. He cautiously approached the box, picking it up and examining it. It was old, the wood worn and faded, but the carvings were still visible, depicting scenes of wolves hunting, of ancient rituals, of a woman with violet eyes. "This," Rhys said, his voice hushed with awe. "This is Lupin craftsmanship. But it's older than anything I've ever seen." He carefully opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a collection of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. The handwriting on the letters was delicate, elegant. The ink faded, but still legible. "These are Alara's letters," Sylvain whispered, her heart skipping a beat. "They must be." Rhys nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "They could be," he said. "They could hold the answers we've been searching for." They decided to take the box with them, to examine the letters later, when they were safe. They left the ruins, moving quickly and silently through the forest, heading towards a hidden cabin that Cain had told them about, a safe haven used by the Lupins in times of need. The cabin was small and rustic, but it was clean and dry, a welcome refuge from the chaos and danger of the ruins. They built a fire, tended to their wounds, and shared a meager meal of dried meat and bread. As the night wore on, and the fire burned low, Sylvain and Rhys finally had a chance to examine Alara's letters. They carefully untied the ribbon, spreading the letters out on the small wooden table. The letters were written in a mixture of English and ancient Lupin script, a testament to Alara's fluency in both languages. They were addressed to Alaric, Rhys's ancestor, her betrothed, the wolf she had loved and betrayed. As Sylvain and Rhys began to read the letters, a story unfolded, a tale of love and loss, of fear and sacrifice, of a desperate attempt to save the Lupins from a threat far greater than they had ever imagined. Alara wrote of her growing fear of Silas's ancestor, a powerful sorcerer who sought to control the Lupins, to exploit their abilities for his own dark purposes. She described his manipulation of the elders, his insidious influence over Alaric's brother, his plans to use the moonstone to amplify his own magic, to enslave the werewolves. She wrote of her desperate decision to steal the moonstone, not to betray the Lupins, but to protect them, to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. She described her flight from Oakhaven, her journey into the wilderness, her attempts to find a way to destroy the sorcerer's power, to break the curse he had placed upon the Lupins. The letters painted a picture far different from any they'd known. Alara, the villain, was Alara the hero. Sylvain and Rhys shared a look, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What if the curse they were trying to break was never Alara's doing at all? And as they read on, one specific passage, written in trembling, frantic script, stood out from the rest. "The true curse is not of blood, but of binding. He seeks to control, not destroy. The moonstone is not the source of the affliction, but the key to its undoing." The words echoed in the small cabin, a revelation that shattered their assumptions, that turned their world upside down. The curse was not what they thought it was, and breaking it would require a sacrifice far greater than they had ever imagined. Laughter from a distant, happier time seemed to echo in Alara's letters, a counterpoint to the whispers of pain and fear that the reality of the situation carried. Chapter 17. The Cold Embrace of Truth. Alara's words, "The true curse is not of blood, but of binding. He seeks to control, not destroy. The moonstone is not the source of the affliction, but the key to its undoing," reverberated through the small cabin, a chilling revelation that shattered their long-held beliefs, that redefined the very nature of the curse they were fighting. Sylvain felt a cold dread creep into her heart, a sense of unease that went beyond the immediate danger of the hunters, of Silas. The curse was not a punishment for Alara's betrayal, but a deliberate act of control, a magical enslavement of the Lupins, orchestrated by Silas's ancestor, the sorcerer. "Binding," Rhys murmured, his voice low and troubled, his golden eyes fixated on the letters. "He bound our wolf nature. He suppressed our ability to shift, to control our transformations." He looked at Sylvain, his expression filled with a mixture of understanding and horror.
"The moonstone," he said.
"It's not the source of the curse, it's the amplifier. It amplifies whatever magic is channeled through it. The sorcerer used it to bind us, to control us. Alara, she took it to prevent him from using it again." Sylvain's mind raced, trying to grasp the implications of this new understanding. The moonstone was not a weapon of destruction, but a tool of control. And breaking the curse would not be a matter of destroying the moonstone, but of releasing the binding, of reversing the magic that had been woven centuries ago. "But how?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do we release the binding? How do we undo the curse?" Rhys shook his head, his expression filled with frustration. "I don't know," he admitted. "Alara's letters, they don't say. She only hints at a ritual, a way to use the moonstone to reverse the sorcerer's magic." He pointed to a passage in one of the letters, a series of cryptic symbols and phrases, written in ancient Lupin script. "This," he said, "this might be it. This might be the key." They spent the rest of the night poring over the letters, studying the symbols, trying to decipher the cryptic passage. The work was slow, painstaking, the language archaic and complex, the meaning obscured by layers of secrecy and ancient lore. As dawn approached, and the first rays of light filtered through the small cabin window, they finally made a breakthrough. They identified a series of keywords, a sequence of actions, a ritual. The ritual required the moonstone, of course, but it also required something else. Something that sent a chill down Sylvain's spine. "Blood," Rhys said, his voice hoarse, his golden eyes filled with dread. "The ritual requires a blood sacrifice." Sylvain felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach. A blood sacrifice.
"Whose blood?
What kind of sacrifice?" Rhys looked at her, his expression filled with a mixture of sorrow and understanding.
"It has to be voluntary," he said.
"It has to be someone connected to the curse, someone with the power to break the binding." He didn't need to say it. Sylvain knew. It had to be her. She was the last of the Corbin line, the descendant of Alara, the one who carried the magic of the oath within her blood. She looked at the moonstone, its ethereal light pulsing gently in her hand. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, but it was also dangerous. It was a tool of power, a key to freedom, but it also demanded a price, a terrible, terrifying price. She thought of Rhys, of his people, of the centuries of suffering they had endured, of the constant threat of the hunters, of the longing for freedom that burned in their hearts. She thought of Alara, of her sacrifice, of her desperate attempt to protect the Lupins, of the love that had driven her to betray her own people, to break the oath. And she thought of herself, of her own life, of her quiet, predictable existence before the river, before Rhys, before the curse. She had been adrift, untethered, searching for something she couldn't name, something that had always felt missing. Now she had found it. A purpose, a connection, a destiny. And it was a destiny that demanded sacrifice, that required her to face her fears, to embrace her power, to give her blood. She looked at Rhys, her violet eyes meeting his golden ones. The fear remained, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was tempered by a sense of resolve, of acceptance. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I'll make the sacrifice." Rhys's eyes widened in surprise, in something that looked like awe. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "Sylvain," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to, I do," she interrupted, her voice firm. "It's the only way. It's the right thing to do." The decision made, the path set, the reality of her choice was no less chilling. And in his eyes, she saw not only gratitude but a reflection of that fear, a shared understanding of the cold embrace of truth that awaited them. Chapter 18. Where Shadows Dance and Secrets Lie. The decision made, a heavy silence settled over the small cabin, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the soft whisper of the wind outside. Sylvain felt a strange mixture of fear and peace. She had accepted her fate, embraced her destiny, and a sense of resolve had settled over her, a quiet strength that she hadn't known she possessed. Rhys, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something that looked like love, gently took her hand, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "We need to prepare," he said, his voice low and serious. "The ritual, it's complex. We need to perform it at the right time, in the right place." He explained that the ritual had to be performed during the full moon, at the height of its power, in the same chamber where they had found the moonstone, the place where the original binding had been cast. "We have 3 days," he said. "We need to gather the necessary materials, to study the ritual, to prepare ourselves." They spent the next 3 days in intense preparation, poring over Alara's letters, studying the cryptic symbols and phrases, deciphering the intricate steps of the ritual. They gathered herbs and minerals, prepared a special incense, crafted a ceremonial dagger from silver and obsidian. Cain, surprisingly, proved to be an invaluable ally. He had a deep knowledge of Lupin lore, of ancient rituals, of the magic that pulsed beneath the surface of the world. He helped them to understand the nuances of the ritual, to anticipate the challenges they would face, to prepare for the worst. As the full moon approached, Sylvain felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition of danger, of something she couldn't quite grasp. The shadows seemed to deepen, the whispers of the wind seemed to carry warnings, the very air seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. On the night of the full moon, they returned to the ruins, moving silently through the darkness, their senses alert for any sign of the hunters. The moon hung high in the sky, casting long, dancing shadows, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. They entered the chamber, the same chamber where they had found the moonstone, where they had battled Silas, where Sylvain had experienced the vision, the glimpse of a possible future. The air here was heavy, charged with an almost palpable energy, the silence broken only by the beating of their hearts. Rhys placed the moonstone on the altar, its ethereal light illuminating the chamber, casting flickering shadows on the walls. He arranged the herbs and minerals, lit the incense, and began to chant in ancient Lupin, his voice low and resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the ruins. Sylvain stood beside him, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. She felt the power of the moonstone, the energy pulsing through her veins, the connection to the ancient magic, to the curse, to Rhys. As the chanting continued, the air in the chamber grew thicker, heavier, the shadows deepening, the light of the moonstone intensifying. Sylvain felt a strange sensation, a tingling in her blood, a pull, a drawing. Rhys stopped chanting, his golden eyes fixed on Sylvain. He picked up the ceremonial dagger, its silver blade gleaming in the moonlight. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sylvain nodded, her gaze meeting his. She was afraid, terrified, but she was also resolute. She had made her choice, she had accepted her fate, and she would not waver. Rhys gently took her hand, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. He turned her hand over, exposing her palm, and with a swift, precise movement, he made a small cut on her palm with a ceremonial dagger. Sylvain gasped, a sharp, stinging pain shooting through her hand. Her blood, crimson in the moonlight, welled up from the cut, dripping onto the altar, onto the moonstone. As her blood touched the moonstone, a surge of energy erupted from the stone, a blinding flash of light that filled the chamber, throwing Sylvain and Rhys backwards. Sylvain felt a searing pain, a burning sensation that spread through her body, from the tips of her toes to the roots of her hair. She cried out, her body convulsing, her mind reeling. She saw visions, fragments of the past, of Alara and Alaric, of the sorcerer, of the binding, of the curse. She saw the werewolves, trapped in their human forms, unable to shift, unable to embrace their true nature. She saw Rhys, his golden eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Break the curse, Sylvain," he whispered. "Free us." And then she saw something else. Something dark, something hidden, something terrifying. She saw Silas, not dead, but transformed. He was no longer human, but something more. Something monstrous. He was surrounded by shadows, by creatures of darkness, by other werewolves. Werewolves who had succumbed to the sorcerer's power, who had embraced the darkness, who had become his servants. And she realized, with a chilling certainty, that the curse was not broken, not yet. The binding had been released, the werewolves were free to shift, but the sorcerer's power remained, and Silas was his heir, his champion, his weapon. The vision faded, leaving Sylvain gasping for breath, her body trembling, her mind reeling. She looked at Rhys, who was slowly getting to his feet, his expression a mixture of confusion and relief. It worked, he said, his voice hoarse. I can feel it. The binding, it's gone." He shifted, his body transforming, his bones cracking and reshaping, his skin rippling and growing fur. He became the wolf, the alpha, his golden eyes gleaming with a newfound freedom, a primal power that had been suppressed for centuries. But Sylvain knew, with a chilling certainty, that the battle was not over. It had just begun. And the shadows, the secrets, the darkness, they were far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The vision showed the truth, the whole truth, and it was far more terrifying than the lies. Chapter 19. The Moon's Silent Witness. The transformation complete, Rhys stood before Sylvain in his wolf form, a magnificent creature of power and grace. His golden eyes, now reflecting the pure, untamed essence of his being, held a depth of gratitude and a flicker of something else. A primal connection, a bond forged in blood and magic that transcended the boundaries of human and wolf. But Sylvain's joy at his newfound freedom was tempered by the chilling vision she had witnessed, the revelation of Silas's transformation, of the sorcerer's lingering power, of the dark forces that were gathering in the shadows. "Rhys," she said, her voice urgent, her hand reaching out to touch his fur, a gesture of comfort and warning. "It's not over. Silas, he's not dead. And he's not human anymore." She explained the vision, the terrifying image of Silas, surrounded by shadows, by creatures of darkness, by other werewolves. Werewolves who had embraced the darkness, who had become his servants. Rhys, in his wolf form, could not speak, but he listened intently, his golden eyes narrowing, his body tensing, his posture radiating a mixture of understanding and fury. He nuzzled her hand, a gesture of reassurance, of shared concern, of a promise. He shifted back to his human form, his body still bearing the marks of the transformation, his expression grim and determined. "We need to warn the others," he said, his voice hoarse, his words laced with urgency. "We need to prepare for war." They left the ruins, moving quickly and silently through the forest, heading towards the hidden cabin, where Cain was waiting. The full moon, high in the sky, cast long, dancing shadows, a silent witness to their desperate flight, to the looming threat that hung over them. As they reached the cabin, they found Cain waiting for them, his expression anxious, his senses alert. He had felt the surge of energy from the moonstone, the release of the binding, and he knew that something significant had happened. Rhys explained everything: the ritual, Sylvain's sacrifice, the vision, Silas's transformation, the gathering darkness. Cain listened intently, his face growing pale, his eyes widening in horror. "The sorcerer's legacy," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "It still lives." He explained that the sorcerer, Silas's ancestor, had not only bound the Lupins, but he had also created a shadow army, a force of werewolves who had willingly embraced the darkness, who had become corrupted, twisted versions of their true selves. "They are stronger, faster, more savage," Cain said, his voice filled with dread. "They are controlled by Silas, by the sorcerer's power. They are his weapons." Sylvain felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach. This was worse than she had imagined. They were not just fighting Silas, they were fighting an army of corrupted werewolves, powered by ancient magic, driven by a thirst for blood and conquest. "We need to unite the Lupins," Rhys said, his voice firm, determined. "We need to gather our forces, to prepare for battle.
We need to fight.
Cain nodded, his expression grim. "I will spread the word," he said. "I will call upon the other packs, the scattered remnants of our people. We will stand together. We will resist." They spent the rest of the night planning, strategizing, preparing for the inevitable conflict. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, that they were facing a powerful and ruthless enemy, but they also knew that they had no choice. They had to fight for their freedom, for their survival, for the future of the Lupins. As dawn approached, and the first rays of light filtered through the trees, Sylvain felt a surge of something.
Not hope, not yet, but resolve.
She had made her choice. She had embraced her destiny, and she would not waver. She looked at Rhys, his golden eyes reflecting the rising sun, his face etched with determination, with love. She knew that they were bound together, not just by the curse, but by something deeper, something stronger, something that transcended the boundaries of human and wolf, of light and darkness. And as the moon, the silent witness to their struggles, to their sacrifices, to their love, began to fade in the brightening sky, Sylvain knew that the final battle was coming, a battle that would determine the fate of the Lupins, of Oakhaven, of the world. A battle that would test their strength, their courage, their love, to the very limit. Chapter 20. A Covenant of Hearts Reborn. The days following the ritual were a blur of frantic activity. Word spread quickly among the scattered remnants of the Lupin packs, carried by Cain and other trusted messengers. Werewolves, drawn by the promise of freedom, by the call of their alpha, began to gather at a hidden valley, deep within the forest, a place of ancient power, a sanctuary from the encroaching darkness. Sylvain, despite her lack of wolf blood, found herself at the center of this gathering storm. Her sacrifice, her connection to the moonstone, her unwavering resolve, had earned her the respect, the admiration, even the reverence of the Lupins. She was no longer an outsider, a stranger, but a leader, a symbol of hope, a warrior. She spent her days learning from Rhys, from Cain, from the other elders of the packs. She learned about Lupin history, about their customs, about their fighting techniques. She discovered a hidden strength within herself, a resilience, a courage that she hadn't known she possessed. And she learned about love. Her bond with Rhys deepened, strengthened, transforming from a forbidden longing into a profound connection, a shared destiny, a covenant of hearts. They were two souls, from different worlds, bound together by fate, by magic, by love. As the final battle approached, Sylvain felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition of danger, of loss. The shadows seemed to deepen, the whispers of the wind seemed to carry warnings, the very air seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. On the eve of the battle, as the full moon rose high in the sky, casting long, dancing shadows over the valley, Rhys gathered the Lupins together. He stood before them, in his human form, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight, his voice resonating with power and authority. "Tonight," he said, his words echoing through the valley, "we fight. We fight for our freedom, for our survival, for the future of our people. He spoke of Silas, of the sorcerer's legacy, of the shadow army, of the darkness that threatened to consume them. He spoke of Alara, of her sacrifice, of her love for the Lupins, of her desperate attempt to protect them. And he spoke of Sylvain, of her courage, of her unwavering resolve, of her willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of the Lupins. She is not one of us, he said, his voice filled with emotion. But she is our heart. She is our hope. She is our future. The Lupins roared their approval, their voices echoing through the valley, a primal sound of unity, of defiance, of determination. As the moon reached its zenith, bathing the valley in an ethereal glow, the shadow army attacked. They emerged from the forest, a wave of darkness, their eyes gleaming with a malevolent light, their bodies twisted and corrupted by the sorcerer's power. Silas, in his transformed state, led the charge, his body a grotesque parody of a werewolf, his eyes burning with a cold, cruel fire. He was a monster, a creature of nightmare, a weapon of darkness. The battle raged, a chaotic melee of werewolves and shadow creatures, of claws and teeth, of silver and steel, of blood and fury. The air was filled with the sounds of growls, screams, and the clang of weapons. Sylvain, armed with a ceremonial dagger and protected by Rhys and Cain, fought alongside the Lupins. She moved with a grace and agility she hadn't known she possessed, her body fueled by adrenaline, by fear, by love. She saw Rhys, in his wolf form, battling Silas, their bodies locked in a deadly embrace, their claws and teeth tearing at each other. She saw Cain, fighting with a savage ferocity, protecting the flanks, rallying the Lupins. And she saw others. Werewolves she recognized, from Oakhaven, from the ruins, werewolves who had succumbed to the darkness, who had become Silas's servants. The battle seemed to stretch on for an eternity, a blur of motion, of violence, of loss. Sylvain saw Lupins fall, their bodies torn and broken, their spirits extinguished. She saw shadow creatures destroyed, their forms dissolving into darkness, their essence returning to the void. As the battle reached its climax, Sylvain found herself face to face with Silas. He was injured, weakened, but still dangerous. His eyes, burning with a cold, cruel fire, locked onto hers. "You," he hissed, his voice a distorted growl. "You cannot win." Sylvain raised the ceremonial dagger, its silver blade gleaming in the moonlight. She felt the power of the moonstone, the energy pulsing through her veins, the connection to the ancient magic, to the curse, to Rhys. "I already have," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. She lunged forward, plunging the dagger into Silas's heart. A scream, a howl of pain and rage, echoed through the valley. Silas's body convulsed, his form flickering, dissolving into shadows, his essence returning to the darkness from which he had come. With Silas's death, the shadow army faltered. Their connection to the sorcerer's power severed. They lost their strength, their ferocity, their will. They scattered, fleeing back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. The battle was over. The Lupins had won. Sylvain stood there, breathing heavily, the ceremonial dagger still clutched in her hand, her body trembling with exhaustion, with relief, with sorrow. Rhys, in his human form, approached her, his golden eyes filled with love. He gently took her hand, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "We did it, Sylvain," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it together." The curse was broken. The binding was released. The Lupins were free. But the victory was bittersweet. Many had fallen, many had suffered. And the scars of the past, the echoes of laughter and whispers of pain, would remain, a reminder of the price of freedom, of the enduring power of love, of the covenant of hearts reborn. Sylvain and Rhys, hand in hand, looked up to meet the fading moon. The light, now soft, gentle, seemed a blessing, a promise. Epilogue. The years that followed the breaking of the curse were a time of healing, of rebuilding, of rediscovery. The Lupins, freed from the sorcerer's binding, embraced their true nature. Their ability to shift between human and wolf forms a symbol of their newfound freedom, their resilience, their unity. Oakhaven, once a town shrouded in secrets and shadows, slowly began to transform. The whispers of the past, the echoes of fear and prejudice, gradually faded, replaced by a growing sense of understanding, of acceptance, of community. Sylvain, no longer an outsider, a stranger, became a bridge between the two worlds, a respected elder, a wise counselor, a friend. She shared her knowledge of the past, of Alara's sacrifice, of the true nature of the curse, helping to heal the wounds that had festered for centuries. And she shared her life with Rhys. Their love, once forbidden, a dangerous longing, blossomed into a deep and enduring bond, a connection that transcended the boundaries of human and wolf, of life and death. They were two souls, from different worlds, united by fate, by magic, by love. They built a home together, near the Whispering River, on the land where Alara and Alaric had once dreamed of a future together, a future that had been stolen from them by the sorcerer's curse. Their home was a haven, a sanctuary, a place of peace and laughter, of shared stories and quiet moments, of love. Sylvain never fully shifted, her human blood preventing the complete transformation, but she embraced the wolf within her, the wildness, the freedom, the connection to Rhys. She learned to run with the pack, to feel the wind in her hair, the earth beneath her feet, the moon's silvery light bathing her skin. And Rhys, in turn, embraced the human within him, the gentleness, the compassion, the love that Sylvain had awakened in him. He became a leader, not just of the Lupins, but of the entire community, guiding them towards a future of peace, of prosperity, of unity. Cain, his loyalty proven, became Rhys's second-in-command, a trusted advisor, a loyal friend, a brother. He found his own peace, his own happiness, his own love, with a woman from Oakhaven, a woman who saw beyond his wolf nature, who embraced his strength, his courage, his heart. The Moonstone, no longer a symbol of control, but a source of power and unity, was placed in a hidden sanctuary, deep within the forest, protected by the Lupins, a reminder of the past, a promise for the future. And as the years turned into decades, and Sylvain's silver hair grew whiter, and Rhys's golden eyes grew softer, their love remained, a constant, unwavering flame, a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, of the wolf's heart, of a covenant of hearts reborn. They often walked by the river, hand in hand, the water whispering secrets of the past, of love found and battles won, of a future secured by courage and sacrifice. Their twilight years were filled not with the fading of light, but with the gentle, enduring glow of a love that had conquered darkness. The end.